He always slammed the gavel twice. Never once. Not 3 times. Twice. Like the final breath before the gallows dropped. That's how Judge Barrett Creighton signaled a life was officially wrecked. Cold. Clean. No second thoughts. Barrett had sat on the bench for 34 years, reigning over the 9th District Court in Crawford County like it was his personal kingdom. The portraits of white men that lined the paneled walls were a shrine to his beliefs, and no one in the courthouse dared to challenge his rulings, especially not if the defendant was black, especially not if the charge involved drugs, defiance, or any kind of backtalk. He never said it aloud, but it didn't have to be said. The numbers told the story. 91% of his black defendants received maximum sentences. Nearly half of those were on first offenses. Barrett had a saying he used often, disguised in legalese. Sometimes you have to remove the rot early, before the tree dies. To him, they were all rot, all the same, just waiting to grow wild if he didn't chop fast enough. No one questioned him. Until Elijah Moore walked into his courtroom. It started with a knock. Midnight. Sharp. Elijah had been asleep in his D.C. apartment, legal briefs sprawled over the floor, laptop buzzing with pending federal filings. The knock came again, harder, urgent. By the time he opened the door, his younger cousin Khalif was already halfway in, breathless. "They got Jamal!" Elijah blinked. "What?" "They got Jamal. Said he had coke on him. Just pulled him over. That cop, the one from the news, Radley. He planted it. I swear he planted it." And that was all it took. Elijah was on the first flight to Georgia the next morning. By noon, he stood in front of the decaying brick jail where his brother Jamal was being held without bail. The smell of mildew and regret hung in the air like swamp water. The receptionist barely made eye contact. When Elijah announced he was Jamal's attorney, she looked at him as if he'd confessed a crime. Jamal was only 20, smart, articulate, studying architecture. He had never even gotten a parking ticket, and yet he sat behind reinforced glass, eyes hollow, lips split, shirt stained with blood from the arrest. "They said I resisted," he said quietly. "Said I had coke in my trunk. I don't even own a trunk." Elijah's jaw clenched. He knew what this was, and worse, he knew who would preside over the trial. "Judge Creighton," he said, almost in a whisper. "They're saying it'll be him." That name, it hit Elijah like a truck of fire. He knew the name. Everyone who worked in civil rights law did. Creighton wasn't just a judge, he was a machine, an institution, a perfectly oiled cog in the wheel of mass incarceration. He'd read about him. Cases going back to the 90s, consistently harsher sentences for black men, suppression of evidence, courtroom rants disguised as moral sermons, and never, not once, had anyone successfully challenged him. No one had dared. Until now. Elijah filed as Jamal's defense the same day. By the end of the week, the motion to dismiss was denied. The evidence was clear, the judge had written. The court will proceed to trial with all due efficiency. Efficient. That word echoed. And so the trial began. Elijah wore charcoal suits every day, clean, precise, intimidating. His presence in the courtroom was surgical, a quiet storm wrapped in logic. Creighton didn't like it, you could tell. The way he watched Elijah with a squint, like a man trying to decipher a foreign language he didn't believe existed. Elijah didn't play to the court, he played to the truth. The prosecution brought in Radley first. The cop stood smug on the stand, hand resting casually on his belt, recounting how he'd noticed suspicious behavior, how Jamal looked nervous, how he smelled something. The bag of white powder was produced like a sacred artifact. The room hushed. Jurors leaned forward. Then Elijah stood, and what followed was not cross-examination. It was a dismantling.
You say you smelled something, with the windows up. Yes, sir, I've got a strong nose. You say he looked nervous. Can you define nervous? Was he shaking, sweating, crying? He looked guilty. Did you find fingerprints on the bag? No, sir. Did you wear body cam? It was malfunctioning. Elijah paused. Then, with slow deliberation, he clicked his pen. Isn't it true, Officer Radley, that in the last year alone, you've made 42 drug arrests, all black males, all in traffic stops, and 28 of those cases have already been dismissed for lack of evidence or procedural misconduct?
Creighton slammed his gavel. Mr. Moore, I'll remind you, this isn't about Officer Radley's history. Stick to your client's case. Elijah didn't flinch. Your Honor, the pattern is the case. But Creighton was done listening. He narrowed his eyes. One more outburst, Counselor, and you'll be in contempt. Elijah turned to the jury, calm, calculated. And for the next 3 days, he built a mountain. Character witnesses, forensic experts, a digital analyst who proved the dashcam footage had a 12-second cut, and finally, a tech who recovered GPS data showing Radley's patrol car never stopped where the arrest allegedly took place. Still, Creighton pushed back. He sustained nearly every prosecution objection, denied new evidence, blocked cross-references. It didn't matter. Elijah was playing a longer game. On day 5, during lunch recess, Elijah met a journalist behind the courthouse. Her name was Aisha Barnes, investigative reporter, known for cracking stories with teeth. Elijah handed her a flash drive. Every case Creighton's ruled on in the last 20 years, racial stats, sentence comparisons, internal memos I got through FOIA, it's all there. Aisha blinked. You planning to bring this into the trial? No, I'm planning to bring it to the country. And that night, as Creighton sat in his study polishing the gavel he'd used since 1988, his television flashed with a special bulletin. Crawford County judge accused of racial sentencing bias. Evidence reveals decades of discriminatory patterns. The report ran for 9 minutes, and by morning, the courthouse was surrounded. Media vans, protesters, signs with Creighton's face drawn over with prison bars. Creighton came to court red-eyed, rage barely masked. Let the record show, he growled, that this court will not be intimidated by outside forces. But the damage had been done. Jurors walked into the courtroom with new questions, and Elijah walked in with an affidavit. It was from a retired bailiff, anonymous for now, claiming that Creighton had once joked about cleaning up the streets faster than the mayor ever could. Creighton refused to allow it into evidence, but the jury had heard enough. The next day, the verdict came back. Not guilty. Gasps echoed. Jamal collapsed into Elijah's arms. And Creighton didn't even slam the gavel. He just sat there. For the first time in 34 years, powerless. And Elijah? He didn't smile. Not yet. Because justice wasn't just one man's freedom. It was every soul Creighton had ever buried alive. And Elijah Moore had only just begun to dig.
That phrase made it to the newspapers. Creighton denied everything. He appeared on a local radio show, his voice still firm but thinner, stretched with strain. This is a witch hunt, he declared. I have served this county with dignity. My decisions were rooted in the law, not color. But the numbers didn't lie, and neither did the survivors. Elijah arranged a town hall, broadcast live. The stage was simple, a microphone, a row of chairs, no lawyers, no judges, just voices. Darrell Wynn, sentenced to 8 years for half a gram, told the audience how he'd missed his mother's funeral. Luther Boyd, who spent 12 years for resisting arrest, read from a notebook he kept in prison, entries about the day he lost custody of his daughter. Then came Cassandra Rivers, holding up the only photograph she had of her husband, Daniel, dead after collapsing from untreated asthma in a cell Creighton had condemned him to. Each testimony was a nail, each tear a hammer. The DOJ case accelerated. Federal investigators arrived. Subpoenas flew like arrows. They found Creighton's investments in private prison stocks, buried under shell companies. They found emails, coded but obvious, between him and law enforcement, discussing cleanup quotas. They even found a transcript from a private judicial seminar where Creighton joked, "If I didn't send them in, I'd see him in the streets. My bench is the dam holding back the flood." Elijah never reacted publicly, but when the charges dropped, he was in the courtroom, front row. Creighton was arrested in silence. The media called it historic, but for Elijah, it was personal. He remembered the first time he sat in a courtroom, as a teenager, watching his cousin get 20 years for a car break-in he didn't commit. Creighton had been the judge. Now that same man stood in an orange jumpsuit, wrists bound, a white towel draped over his shoulder, like he could somehow still cover himself in dignity. The trial was federal. Elijah wasn't the prosecutor, but he was everywhere, in evidence binders, in affidavits, in witness prep rooms. His fingerprints were on the very blueprint of Creighton's downfall. It was a clean, merciless takedown. The prosecution laid it bare. Creighton had profited from every conviction. He had coordinated with officers to target young black men with weak cases. He had destroyed exculpatory evidence, refused retrials on technicalities, and ensured the prison beds kept filling. And when the defense tried to play the good servant of the law card, Elijah released a statement with scanned copies of memos where Creighton referred to defendants as statistical waste and repeat liabilities, not humans. The courtroom fell silent when it was read aloud. The jury took 3 hours to decide. Guilty, on all counts. Sentencing, 30 years. No parole. Creighton blinked when the sentence was read, as if trying to wake from a nightmare only he believed was unfair. His gavel was confiscated, submitted into evidence as a symbol of corruption. Elijah received it weeks later, shipped to his office in a padded box, the polished wood now wrapped in evidence tape. He didn't hang it. He locked it in a glass case under a plaque that read, "Let the gavel fall, but let the people rise." In the months that followed, the Verdict Project expanded statewide. They reopened 84 cases, overturned 19 wrongful convictions, passed the Elijah Moore Judicial Accountability Bill, mandating oversight panels for every judge in the state. Jamal returned to college on a scholarship named after one of the exonerees who'd never made it home. And Elijah? He walked into courtrooms no longer to defend, but to rebuild, to teach, to dismantle quietly what others had built in cruelty. One morning, a young public defender approached him. "You really did it. You took him down." Elijah looked at her, smiled faintly. "No," he said, "we unmasked him. But taking down a man isn't justice. Making sure there's never another like him again, that's the work." Outside the courthouse, a new mural had been painted across the brick wall that once bore Judge Creighton's name. A tree rising from chains, branches etched with the names of the freed. At the base, 2 hands, one old, one young, passing a gavel shaped not like a hammer, but like a key. Elijah stood before it that afternoon, quiet, reflective, and for the first time, he let himself cry. Not because the fight was over, but because the war had turned, and for the first time in a long time, truth had not just visited the courtroom, it had stayed.